Ванкум приветствует вас!
Welcome to another video, and huge thanks to our patrons who choose to support us. You've got another poll up over at our Patreon account, helping us choose one of our future videos. And now, could the EU military conquer the UK? This video will cover just that. Our usual rules also assume sudden hostilities. UK is island-based, of course. That helped it in the World War II, but this time the opponent is much stronger. If we assume EU is somehow completely united, its forces dwarf the British. And hey, we're talking about the fantasy war really, so a united EU is equally fantastical. UK's army is made up of several components. Its army reserve should really be counted as an active trained force, leading to 6.5 fewer troops than EU's force. Trained reservists are almost 9 times more numerous in EU than in the UK. When it comes to paramilitary, EU seemingly has a huge number of additional troops, but most of those are really police-grade trained personnel without proper equipment for offensive actions. The numbers are not everything. Their location matters, and most of EU's forces are scattered all around the continent. France alone couldn't do much, for example. So in order to attempt a successful crossing of the Channel, months would be needed to assemble various EU forces. But there are other fronts where the war would be fought other than the Channel. UK has many overseas territories or bases where it has troops. It couldn't possibly keep them in such a war against an opponent with a navy many times larger. Though EU would be in no rush to go after those territories. Simply cutting them off from mainland would be enough for starters. UK would have its plate full trying to reinforce its other islands closer to home. Some of them are so close to the enemy that they would be impossible to keep. UK would lose some soldiers in the process, as most of those overseas territories are manned by active army troops. Over 11,000 soldiers, good deal of them ground troops, would thus be unavailable. But the biggest battle by far might be fought over Ireland. While UK has its Northern Ireland territory, the rest of the island of Ireland is part of EU. And being enemy territory, UK would be unlikely to simply let EU amass its forces there, as then its mainland could be threatened from a close distance, from 2 different directions. While a huge landing over the Channel would require months of preparation, reinforcing a friendly territory like Ireland could be done much quicker, which is why UK would likely act fast. Ireland itself has only a small force, but starting British forces in neighboring Northern Ireland are even smaller. It's likely UK would take a few days to consolidate first. During that time, Royal Navy and Air Force would have the crucial task of not letting any quick reinforcement troops reach Ireland. Given how EU forces, France notwithstanding, are even farther away, that should be doable. Britain would hastily ready its airborne assault troops and its marines. It would use its helicopters and transport planes to quickly bring in more troops to Northern Ireland, and then try and take the whole island. Direct assault on Ireland could be held by almost 10,000 maneuver unit troops, by which point Britain would have more troops than the Republic of Ireland. Several days might be needed to assemble those troops. Commercial airliners and other planes would be bringing in additional Royal Army soldiers, with transport planes and cargo ships bringing in their vehicles. While Ireland could mobilize some of its population, its armed forces aren't really prepared to train or equip any sort of significant mobilized force. It would still take weeks to get any half-serious unit formed, and most of them would barely be armed properly. The British might encounter some issues in Northern Ireland with part of the population rising up, but with ever-increasing number of British troops arriving, it's unlikely such insurgents could do much. While some of the lakes would help the defenders, Ireland is fairly flat and accessible to large ground troop formations. With a huge British edge in situational awareness and air power, most of the Republic of Ireland might fall within weeks. The French and the Low Countries might complicate the matters if EU talks them into taking one for the team and going all in on Britain with their air forces right away, before other European air forces get rebased closer. That would tie up most of British air resources just for defense. Of course, that would also mean the French and Benelux would have to endure the biggest air force casualties of all EU air forces. The Shetland Islands would likely be taken by EU, possibly during the Ireland campaign, when most of the Royal Navy would be tied up making sure Europeans aren't sneaking up reinforcements to Ireland. While they lack comparable infrastructure and are relatively small, Shetland Islands would still provide the EU with a meaningful stepping stone from the north. As EU assembles its air forces closer to UK, utilizing numerous commercial airports, the air campaign could start properly. The sheer numbers going against UK would be impossible to defend against. With EU air defenses pooled, it's unlikely Britain could seriously threaten the European lands. UK SAM systems are tailored for tactical defense and would be of little use against EU planes striking from medium altitudes. The cruise missile arsenals are also on European side, though it's an area where UK is unusually strong for its size. Europe does have some added guided ballistic missiles though. UK's strong suit are also aerial radar platforms and various special mission planes, though in sheer numbers they still fall behind EU. Europe would, however, have a decisive edge at monitoring the British and Irish shores, once most of the Royal Air Force is suppressed. With almost no ground-based area air defenses, it would be fairly easy for Europe to track the British forces and pick the least defended spots for attacks. UK would have some grasp on what's incoming and what's going on at European bases, due to their satellite fleet, but their numbers aren't suited for tactical tracking of forces once at sea. In the end, the UK would be forced to distribute their ground forces all around the country in order to prevent a landing, and yet that may not be enough. EU's amphibious landing fleet is fairly large when combined. The actual troop capacity shown is theoretical maximum. In reality, larger ships would carry half as many troops, but with heavier equipment and supplies. Smaller landing boats and craft, though, would be limited to more narrow crossings in the channel. When airborne assaults are added, it's very likely EU would be able to make beachheads at several places, though it would have to pick areas that aren't as important to the British, areas close enough for air support, and ones where British heavy vehicles would not be able to come that quickly. The British Army is somewhat lacking in heavy offensive hardware, complicating their ability to rush EU's beachheads where fairly lightly equipped units would oppose them. When the EU's recon edge is added, as well as advantage in aerial strikes and attack helicopters, those British armored or artillery counterstrikes would be blunted further. Still, the south of England would likely see the greatest concentration of British units and heaviest losses for the EU. Eastern coast would likely be less defended, and EU would have better chances of establishing a foothold, and even assaulting Ireland would not be out of the question. British troop numbers would simply be too few to guard all the potential points, especially with added Irish coast to defend as well. Could the Royal Navy do much to stop all those landings? Probably not. The F-35s have not really done significant carrier ops training yet, as the Air Wing is scheduled to be completed next year. With the help of the land-based air forces, it would be a matter of time before UK vessels get hunted down. Also, it's unlikely Royal Navy subs would be any sort of a decisive factor thanks to the sheer number of anti-submarine platforms facing them. European assaults would be initially bloody, and some months would need to pass for the fleets and troops to be assembled and for air superiority to be achieved. But the British would slowly lose most of their heavy weapon systems through airstrikes and attrition. And eventually the steady additions of new beaches taken would solidify into whole fronts, and push into UK territory could commence, probably before 1 year passes. If the EU is somehow miraculously united in their effort, the proximity of the UK to European mainland and sheer numbers would eventually break the British. The eventual loss of all overseas territories would also be assured. Of course, many different scenarios could be made. For example, if only some of the EU countries attack the British. France, Germany and Spain alone might be unlikely to succeed in such an invasion in a similar time frame. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.